Hello and welcome to this EPA webinar on RPA applications. So this webinar is for those who wish to apply to become radiation protection advisors under the Ionizing Radiation Regulations 2019, and indeed for those who are already RPAs and wish to renew their approval. So most of you will be aware that we have recently made changes to our RPA system. So where previously we had a two-category system, Category 1 for medical dental and Category 2 for industrial education and veterinary, we've now changed that system into a two-level system, which is not defined per category anymore, but defined based on the risk and complexity of the practices on which the RPA will advise. So a Level 2 RPA under the new system will be able to advise on any practice, providing it's within their area of competence, where a Level 1 RPA will be limited to advising on certain practices, which are outlined here. So these are the more low risk, low complexity practices and include in the medical sector things like general radiography, mobile radiography, DEXA, mammo, and specimen radiography. In terms of dental practices, all dental practices will fall under Level 1. So Level 1 RPAs can advise on all dental practices, including intra-extraoral units, cone beam CTs, or handheld. Similarly, most vets will be able to get their advice from a Level 1 RPA, except those perhaps who are veterinary nuclear medicine would be the exception to that. In terms of industry then, cabinet X-ray systems, laboratory equipment with small sealed sources, XRF, XRD, installation servicing of radiological equipment and security screening can all be covered by a Level 1 RPA. So this list of practices that a Level 1 RPA can advise on will be found in the guidance on our website. So the Level 2 RPA is closely aligned with our existing Category 1 and 2 RPAs. So all current existing RPAs have transitioned automatically to Level 2 RPA. Now, undertakings must seek advice from an RPA who is approved and also who has the appropriate knowledge and expertise in relation to the particular practice on which the advice is being sought. So I suppose the point we're making here is that approval by the EPA does not of itself mean that an RPA can provide advice in any particular situation. So the undertaking has a responsibility, obviously, to make sure that the RPA they're consulting with has the appropriate knowledge and expertise for their practices. And similarly, the RPA has a responsibility to advise the undertaking in that regard and to only provide radiation protection advice within their own areas of competence. Okay, so just some considerations for new RPAs before starting an application. The first will be, do I understand the role of the RPA? So make sure you really do understand the role of the RPA and what you will be expected to do if you are approved. Do I meet the minimum criteria to apply? So we'll cover what those minimum criteria are in a moment, but essentially just to point out that if you don't meet that minimum criteria, your application, it won't progress to the next stage. So make sure that you meet that minimum criteria before you invest time in doing an application. Do I have the required knowledge and experience of the competencies? We'll cover the competencies in a moment and how you would demonstrate that knowledge and experience. Do I have the ability to advise? And that's very important. So while some candidates may have knowledge and some experience of the competencies, the ability to advise piece is really, really important and something that we need to be assured of in your application before we can approve. Have I been mentored in the role by an existing RPA? So mentoring is not mandatory under the new system, but it is very strongly encouraged. And in the past, the stronger applications have been from candidates that have been mentored by an existing RPA. It really helps, obviously, in developing the knowledge and experience, but particularly on the ability to advise piece if you have been mentored by an existing RPA. And finally, do I have the support of senior management? So what we see is that it does take time to build up, your knowledge and experience. It takes time and it takes resources, and so it's really helpful for prospective candidates if they have the support of their line managers and senior managers. Okay, so the new application process. So as before, the approval model is competency based. So you will have to demonstrate in your application that you have the required competencies. So regardless of whether you meet minimum criteria or not, it's really approval is granted on the basis that the committee is assured that the candidate has the required competencies. So in terms of requirements, so you will have to show that you meet the minimum criteria. You will then have to complete a competency matrix, which we'll cover in detail in a few moments, that will demonstrate that you have the required competencies. And finally, and this is a new requirement, candidates will have to submit a portfolio of evidence of their own work. And the primary aim of the portfolio is to demonstrate your ability to advise. So again, we'll cover it in detail in a few moments. So the minimum criteria, okay, so we have different minimum criteria at level 1 and level 2. So at level 1, in terms of education, it's a level 8 degree in a relevant discipline, and this can include physics, engineering, or a relevant clinical discipline. So we've broadened out the level 1 to include those backgrounds also. And then in terms of experience, level 1 candidates would need to have a minimum 3 years relevant professional experience in radiation protection. And just to emphasize that point, that it's professional experience in radiation protection. So it's not 3 years working as a dentist or, you know, a clinical radiographer, that really your role would have to have been related to radiation protection for at least 3 years before applying. In terms of level 2 then, we're looking for a level 9, so master's level, and the applicant's formal education, so level 8 and level 9 combined, must include significant components of physics and radiation protection. So we don't specify exactly what you need there, but for example, things like a degree in physics with perhaps a master's in, well, medical physics would be an obvious one, but some things like health and safety or occupational health would also be considered appropriate. Conversely, then you could have maybe your degree in engineering followed by, a master's in medical physics, but just that overall your level 8 and level 9 must include significant components of physics and radiation protection. And then in terms of experience, level 2 candidates must have minimum 3 years relevant professional experience at senior level in radiation protection. The core competencies then, so at level 1 and level 2, there's 4 common core competencies. Now obviously at the different levels we'd expect a greater depth and breadth of knowledge at level 2, but essentially the 4 core competencies are the same, and they're basic knowledge of radiation protection standards, operational radiation protection, and organisation of radiation protection. At level 2 then, and there's an additional 2 competencies of transport and waste, because level 2 RPAs will be approved to advise on practices that involve radioactive sources. So we'll look at each of the competencies in a bit more detail now. So the first one is basic knowledge, and that's your basic knowledge of radiation and the physical principles underlying radiation. So things like atomic and nuclear physics, biology, biological effects of radiation, interactions of radiation with matter, detection and measurement methods, quantities and units, and types of sources. Just to point out for this one, if you have a physics qualification, or if you've done, for example, the MPE training scheme, that's sufficient to demonstrate this competency. So we'll assume if you have those qualifications that you meet this competency, and you don't need to provide any additional detail on that. Those without a background in physics, we will look for more detail to show that you have the knowledge and experience of these competencies. So for example, if you have a radiography background, a dentistry background, you'll probably need to have done an additional course and have some experience as well to demonstrate that you can meet that competency. Knowledge of radiation protection standards then, here we're looking for knowledge and experience of applying the legal and regulatory requirements and where they come from. So we'd want to see the candidates have knowledge of the international recommendations and conventions, EU directives, and then how they have been transposed into Irish legislation, and even specifically our own guidance and authorisation conditions. We're also looking for knowledge of the basis for those radiation protection standards, so things like epidemiology, linear hypothesis, stochastic deterministic effects, and knowledge and experience of applying the ICRP principles of justification, optimization, and dose limitation. And here we're really looking for in-depth, up-to-date knowledge of the current thinking behind these standards and directives and ICRP principles. And just a note as well for candidates that perhaps work outside of Ireland, you really need to demonstrate the understanding of the Irish regulatory system and regulatory requirements. The next competency then is operational radiation protection. So this is really radiation protection in practice, on the ground, operational stuff. So things like risk assessment, optimization, personal and area monitoring, designing installations, shielding calculations, procedures, dealing with incidents and accidents, outside workers, classification of areas, categorization of workers, QA and QC, and training. And while the knowledge side of things is important, really we'll be really looking at practical experience for these competencies, and how you have applied your knowledge in practice. Then there's organisation of radiation protection, and this is about radiation protection governance, so understanding the roles of the undertaking, the RPA, the RPO, committees, and how it all fits together. Safety culture, in particular radiation safety culture, so human behaviour and how you can promote and advocate for a good radiation safety culture. Communication skills, obviously very important as an RPA to have good communication skills, and that ability to advise. And we say here at both senior strategic, which is obviously very important, you'll be advising the undertaking and senior management, but also operationally as well, and advising staff on the ground. Then the transport and waste, so these are for level 2 only. So in terms of transport, we're looking for knowledge of the IAEA transport of dangerous goods and the ADR carriage of dangerous goods by road regulations. In terms of waste, we look for the principles of waste management and any legislation governing disposal of radioactive waste. Okay, so how do you demonstrate these competencies? Well, we've developed a template which is on our website and available, and this is the only format that will be accepted by the committee. And essentially, candidates must use a combination of their education, any additional courses or conferences they've attended, any reference documents that they've used to supplement their knowledge, and their practical experience. And look, depending on the particular competence, like I said, the operational stuff, the practical experience will be very important. So I suppose the weight in terms of education, courses and practical experience will vary between the competencies. Just to give an example then of, and not to be taken as, this is all you would need to demonstrate this competency, but just the type of things that you would include. For example, on the risk assessment, you might have covered a risk assessment module in your BSc. Further courses may have included a shielding course, a risk assessment workshop. You could point towards having read the IR 19 guidance document in the chapter on risk assessment and Regulation 31. Practical experience, then you would detail, the different radiological practices and facilities for which you have developed risk assessments. The portfolio then, as I said before, this is a new requirement, and what we're asking for here is recent examples of your own work in radiation protection. So you will have, completed the competency matrix, you will have detailed your knowledge, you will have detailed your experience, and now we need to see, your ability to translate that knowledge and experience into effective radiation protection advice. And that's where the portfolio comes in. So all candidates must submit a comprehensive risk assessment. So that's mandatory that you submit a good risk assessment. The reason we've made that mandatory is because, a good comprehensive risk assessment will actually demonstrate many of the competencies, particularly in the operational radiation protection. So, it should demonstrate risk assessment, categorization of workers, classification of areas, procedures, monitoring of workers. So it'll be a really useful example for us to assess knowledge, experience and ability to advise. At level 1 then we ask for 2 additional examples of your work, and at level 2 we ask for 4. Now in the guidance we do provide a list of indicative examples of things that you could submit. This is a non-exhaustive list, and if you have a different example that you feel really demonstrates your knowledge, experience and ability to advise, then do feel free to submit that. But we do give in the guidance examples of things that you could submit. Now with the portfolio, we're requesting that candidates submit a narrative around each example, limited to 300 words, so quite short, but it's important because, in the past people would have submitted examples of their own work, and for example, they may have submitted a spreadsheet with quite complex shielding calculations, so quite impressive, quite comprehensive, but didn't demonstrate, I suppose, how they used those shielding calculations and translated them into radiation protection advice. So this is where the narrative will help us to understand the significance of your examples. Now we're suggesting that you use the STAR format for this narrative, so explain the situation, explain the task, what was done, and the action, what was your role in it, and the outcome. And so we just need to really clearly see your contribution to radiation protection at an advisory level. So it's taking it that step further from just showing us that you have the knowledge and experience to showing us that you have the ability to use that to provide effective advice. Now, the application form for new applicants. So the fee is €550. We advise that you take copies of materials submitted, as we don't normally return that. There's a section for personal details, qualifications, your professional record, and then your current job description. And what we'd like to see in that is an organogram and your role within the organisation in terms of radiation protection and governance clearly outlined. Okay, so the application form for new applicants. So it does have some parts that I just want to draw your attention to. So there's part 4, which is declaration of support by mentor, RPA or senior manager. So again, as I said before, it's not mandatory to have been mentored by an existing RPA, but we would like to see, a declaration of support by either a mentor, an existing RPA, or by your senior manager. And this person will essentially just declare that they're supporting your RPA application, that it reflects the nature of your work, and that they know of no reason why the applicant would be unsuitable to be an RPA. And then there is space there for any additional comments if they want to, provide some sort of a reference or additional comments supporting your application. Part 6 is our list of RPAs available for consultation. So this part you only complete if you want to have your name and contact details listed on our website. So this is essentially for third parties such as dentists or vets, or industrial facilities or hospitals, if they're looking for an RPA, that they can look at our register. So we will have the names of all RPAs on our register, but only those who wish to will have their contact details listed. So if you want to be available for consultation and for third parties to view your phone number, email or address, then you would fill in this part of the form. There's also a self-declaration, and this is for candidates themselves. And there's a few points in this. So the first thing it's saying is RPAs must recognise their area of competence and only provide advice on matters within those areas, and that you will stay up to date with most recent information on radiation protection. It's also certifying that the application is complete, correct and true, that there's no falsification. And then it's stating that the EPA may request further evidence and you will supply it within the required time frame, and that you'll maintain your registration if you are registered or approved as an RPA according to the conditions. It also agrees that the EPA may, in accordance with regulation 79(1)(c), remove my name from the register if the EPA is of the view that the candidate no longer meets the approval criteria. So that part just needs to be signed and dated and submitted with your competency matrix, your portfolio, and your full application form. And essentially that is the new application completed. So moving on then to reapproval applications. So this has quite significantly changed from the old model. So what we're clearly saying now for our reapproval renewals, we're not seeking to reassess that the candidates meet the competency requirements. So our view is that was now done at approval. And essentially what we're trying to assess at reapproval is that the candidate has been active as an RPA, providing radiation protection advice to undertakings, and that they have maintained their knowledge of the competencies through CPD. So in order to do that, really, we're asking for two things. So one is a short summary, and we say max 1,500 words, detailing the major items of radiological protection advice the RPA has given in the preceding 5 years. We're also looking for CPD record, and we have developed a spreadsheet for that, so a renewal CPD spreadsheet that candidates fill in. Now again, previously we would have asked for evidence of CPD. We're not requiring every candidate for reapproval to submit all their certs and evidence of CPD, but they must have that evidence available should it be requested. And in any cycle we will request a certain amount of, we will audit a certain amount of applications and request that CPD evidence. Okay, so what are the CPD requirements? Well, at level 1, it's 75 credit points over preceding 5 years, and at level 2, it's 100 credit points. Now, at both levels, at least 25 of those points must be from activities where the RPA was the recipient of knowledge or training. So that's through attending courses or other educational activities. The points claimed should relate primarily to occupational or public radiation protection within the scope of IRR 19, and the type of activities should be varied and spread evenly over the 5-year period. Now, we will make allowance for individual circumstances. For example, if candidates have taken a career break or maternity leave, we accept that they may not have CPD points for those periods. Now, the categories, so they're adapted from EFOMP. So those in the medical sector who are also MPEs will find that they're very similar in terms of the categories, but there is some differences. So just to point that out, so for example, I think in the MP, attendance at formal local educational activities is in category 2 rather than category 1. So just to be aware that there are some differences, and so just have a look at them carefully to see which activities fall into category 1 and category 2. But essentially category 1 are educational activities, and category 2 encompasses other things like self-directed learning, on-the-job activities, or teaching and research. Now, I mentioned the CPD Renewal Spreadsheet. Again, this is the only format that will be accepted by the committee. So that will ask you to submit details, under each category. Again, another difference is you'll provide your details of the course, the title, the provider, the duration, but we are also asking you to fill in what was the learning outcome. So what were the key learnings from the particular CPD activity, and what's the relevance to the role of the RPA. Now, the credit points recorded, again, just to remind you that the number of points claimed should be that relevant to occupational and public radiation protection. Okay, so if you do a course for a week, but only half a day is relevant to occupational or public radiation protection, we expect you to only claim those points. And then the final column there is the supporting evidence. So that's just for you to detail what supporting evidence you have. So whether that's a certificate or a programme or confirmation of registration, just detail that there. But as I say, we're not asking people to submit that unless you are requested as part of an audit. So for reapproval applications then, the fee is 320. Again, you'll be asked for your personal details, your qualifications, professional record, the current job description, including an organogram and role within the organisation. You'll also be asked to fill in the list of RPAs available for consultation if you wish to do so, and complete the self-declaration as discussed earlier. Okay, so just a little bit on the assessment process then. Okay, so because this is changing as well. So previously we would have accepted applications throughout the year and assessed them, as they came in on a case-by-case basis. That's changing now. We're going to have 2 submission dates or closing dates per year. So that'll happen at the end of August and the end of February each year. Applications can be submitted at any time to radregulatory@epa.ie. But if you, for example, if you submit in September, your application won't be assessed until after the end of February. So just to highlight as well, you must submit your application prior to your expiry date. So if the RPA cert expires in January 2023, you're required to submit your application in August 2022. So just be aware of that. Now, the other thing we've introduced is the option of an interview. So the committee may request an interview with the candidates to clarify aspects of the application if required. You can expect a response within 60 working days. And if you're approved, the approval is valid for 5 years. Applicants that are not approved will be informed of the areas in which they fail to meet the approval criteria. But we really hope, again, under the previous system, there was often quite a lot of back and forth between candidates. And we hope now under the new system, by being really, really clear with what we require, that, you know, most candidates will be approved first time, hopefully. There is an appeals and complaints process as well. So if you are not approved as an RPA, you do have the right to appeal. And if the candidate does appeal, they must, you know, apply setting out their grounds for appeal, and there will be an independent appeals panel established. Complaints or information questioning the competence of an RPA will be investigated. And just a reminder that we can remove an RPA from the register if we are of the view that they no longer meet the approval criteria. Something we have never had to do so far, but just to point out that there is that provision there. Okay, so that covers the application and assessment process for radiation protection advisors. And we appreciate it's, you know, a new approval model, and there are some changes to the old system. And so if you have any questions, please do feel free to contact us at radregulatory@epa.ie or our ORP Eden support@epa.ie. And please do contact us if you have any questions at all. Just finally, again, to emphasize the next closing date will be the end of August. So please get your applications in before then. Otherwise, the next closing date will be the end of February next year. So thank you and goodbye.